Hi there, I'm Tina Srabotniak. I'm the acting head of programming at the Appel Salon. My great pleasure to welcome you all tonight to the Appel Salon to hear Guy Gavriel Kay in conversation with the Globe and Mail's Jared Bland. So we're going to start things off tonight with Nicole Winstanley, and she's from Penguin Random House, the publisher, of course, and she's going to introduce Guy as he reads. Nicole.
Hi there. I hope you can forgive me. I'm kind of losing my voice. I started to sort of mime towards the end of the day at work to make sure I still had it. So let me know if you can hear me. But it's lovely to see all of you here on this special evening in honor of my dear friend and beloved author, Guy Gavriel Kay. Guy and I were just in the back room talking about how long we've been doing this, and we've known each other for 20 years now. Gulp, how did that happen? And he likes to joke about, he often likes to rib me and joke about the first time that we met. So I thought I'd take a moment to mention that. He would tell you that I seemed a bit nervous. Well, of course I was. And that I came packing a substantial notebook. This is also true. But one should always bring a notebook to a meeting with Guy Kay. You've read his novels, so you know that there's a lot to know and that he always gets the details right. And so from the outset, I had to as well. I had to know the ins and outs of his some 25 publishers around the world. But it's more than that. You bring a notebook to a meeting with Guy Kay because after the fact, surely you will want to revisit the things that he said, the insights, big and small, the observations, the recommendations, and not kind of just a point form. You really want to capture the way that he expressed it and mull it over in your mind later on, much like when you read his novels. There's also a lot to be learned in conversation with Guy, as we'll see tonight when he's speaking with Jared Bland from the Globe. A lot to learn about the world around you, about ourselves, and about how we fit into all of it. In my mind, his work really lives up to one of my favorite Emerson quotations: "Fiction reveals truth, reality obscures." And that truth is on full display in his latest offering, Children of Earth and Sky, which is a fiercely intelligent novel about family, about loyalty, ambition. And one of my favorite parts of this novel, which I hope they will touch upon, is it's also about kindness. The early reviews for this book are absolutely gorgeous, and I hope you will forgive me as I read from one of them, but I just can't resist. The Library Journal, fitting, given that we're in a library, in their starred review said of Children of Earth and Sky, "Kay triumphs at creating complex political landscapes and then populating them with characters who make the stakes important and the struggles real." I especially like this line: "Another magnificent history that never was, from the master." So I'm going to stop there because you want to hear from him, not me, and clearly I could go on and on, voice or not, but before I do, just get your notebook ready. And at that, Guy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nicole. I should say something like, we have to stop meeting this way. But in fact, it works for me. It is wonderfully reassuring and ratifying for an author to finish a book after a very long period of living with it and see so many of you on a night when the Raptors are playing come downtown to share the worldwide launch of the new book. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here at the lectern because Jared gets nasty if he's waiting too long, and I'm hoping for softball, easy question. If I make him wait too long, he can ask why I'm a New York Yankees fan, and then all hell will break loose. A few thank yous. First of all, thank you to Tina and to the Reference Library. This is our third time doing a book launch in the library. I'm not going to belabor the point, but libraries are under siege to a certain degree. Librarians have been under siege to a certain degree. And we're sitting here now in what's essentially a palace of wisdom. The library system in Toronto is one of the very best in the world. This building is a place where any one of us could get essentially the best education in the world just by working through the stacks here. I hope that if you have a chance, you'll do what I'm doing, and before you leave or on another occasion, and express your thanks and appreciation for the Toronto Public Library system and for the librarians that sustain it, because they sustain us insofar as we are lovers of books, of history, of knowledge. This is one of the places that centers that love and awareness. So that's my first thank you. My second is to Jared Bland sitting here, or I like to call him Bland of the Globe, and I'm not simply trying to soften him up. Jared, very briefly, is and has been for some time one of the lucid and passionate spokespersons for the world of books and art and culture at a time when they need spokespeople. They need people reading carefully, listening carefully, looking carefully, and writing lucidly about what they've read and seen and heard. And from the time I met him, remember we talked about a man who's still very young. I'm allowed to say that. Jared has thought that way and written that way. And I'm delighted that he's come back to do another dance with me up here. I'm speaking metaphorically, don't worry. So thank you to Jared. And let me make a last point by way of thank you. I've said this before in other contexts. We write our books alone, most of us, for the most part. We don't produce this alone. We don't create an artifact that we can bring and share with you without the help, the creativity, the commitment, the passion, the intelligence of a great many people. And I've been extremely lucky over the years in a remarkable number of the people I work with. And Nicole, as she said, has been both a very dear friend and a profoundly trusted publisher and editor for a long time. I'm so pleased that we have been doing this for the time we have. I think you were 12 when you started. And I'm delighted to be bringing Children of Earth and Sky to Canadian readers with Penguin Canada. I want to do another quick shout out, just to show what a generous, magnanimous person I am, to Trish Barnett, who is the publicist who you will see when we do the signings later is actually staying the whole time to help out. Trish, I'm going to tell you why I'm being magnanimous. Trish has me doing 10 airplanes in 13 days. Would you say something nice about a person like that? The truth is, though, that the number of people that we rely upon to help produce, edit, package, promote, make available a book is considerable. And I've been very fortunate here. I want to give a very quick shout out also, because this is the worldwide launch. My American editor for a great many years was a woman named Susan Allison in New York, who was also, for a curmudgeon, I keep collecting friends. I'm not sure how this happens. It worries me. But Susan was for about 20, 25 years as well, both a trusted editor and a dear friend. She retired last year after starting the process of Children of Earth and Sky in New York, handing it over to another senior editor in New York, a woman named Claire Zion, who is well on the way to also becoming a friend. She sent me a note a little while ago as more responsibilities were being attached to her on the administrative side, and they were taking away editing responsibilities. So she sent me a note saying they could take a lot away from me, but they can't take you away from me. That's an editor you like. That's an editor you like. And finally, there is another new editor for me. The British launch of Children of Earth and Sky is tomorrow from Hodder and Stoughton. And Oliver Johnson, my new editor there, is responsible for their beautiful packaging of the book. And Oliver and I are off to an extremely positive seeming beginning because we share a passion for Ardbeg single malt. And I'm not sure what two men need beyond that to form a lifelong friendship. So those are the thank yous I wanted to express to my colleagues here. Now, Children of Earth and Sky has an origin story, and it's actually one of those stories that I hope you'll find funny because it's actually true. And some of my best stories are only marginally true. I write novels, remember? But a number of years ago, I was driving in Croatia with my publisher, editor there, who have published every single book I've ever written. Catching up. They're not up to date yet, but they're getting there. And we were heading towards the Adriatic coast to a confrontation with a great many librarians. There's a theme here building, obviously. And we're driving along winding Roman roads towards the coast, and Nevin is driving, and he's driving very fast. This is an alpha male Croatian businessman, editor, and he's moving quickly along roads that he knows very well. And he's telling me about how the Romans built these roads, and you can always tell what parts are Roman because the grade is better in the Roman roads than what we ourselves built. And he's holding forth, and all of a sudden, he breaks off in mid-sentence, and he takes both hands off the steering wheel, and he turns to me. He's driving, and he says, "I know what you should write about. You should write about the Uskoks." And in the suave, debonair, urbane manner for which I'm very well known, I said, "Say what?" And he said, as if he was making it clear to someone of defective intelligence, "The Uskoks." And I said, "There's a curve in the road." And he said, "Of course there's a curve in the road." And he went back and he continued driving. And he told me, as we drove, both hands on the road, about the Uskoks of Sen, who were pirates and raiders on the Dalmatian coast side of the Adriatic in the Renaissance, in their small, swift boats that could come up rivers and raiding inland over the mountains. And he said, "You've got to write a book about them." Now, I'm not very persuadable. It took me 9 or 10 years. I processed this information and filed it somewhere under the 240, "You've got to write about this" suggestions. And it wasn't until I'd written 2 books inspired by Chinese history and come back to Croatia, and I met an academic, again on the Adriatic coast, and he followed up. It was a 1-2 punch 6 or 7 years apart, and sent me a number of articles, sent me to an English nonfiction writer about these people. And in the mysterious way that I would be lying now if I said I understood this, something came together as a concept, a setting, an idea of what I might want to do with the Renaissance of Europe. A few people have asked me, what drew you to the Renaissance? And I said, what's not to draw you to the Renaissance? What's not compelling and fascinating? But, as some of you will know, I'd like to move a little over from the periods and the characters sometimes whom everyone has written about, and writing about 15th century, a little to the east, a little off to the edge of the stories that we all know very well, was one of the things that drew me towards writing Children of Earth and Sky. So, the short reading, and it's going to be very short, and I actually talked to Jared about this before. It's not funny. I'm apologizing in advance because I usually like to be funny when I read. And Jared said, which was actually very funny, he says, we'll make them laugh. And so he says, you don't have to in the reading. But I want to read this for a couple of reasons. One, because it's short, and we're going to move over there in a few moments. The other, because it's almost dead center in the book. There's no spoiler. There's no one in this little passage. This is a pullback, historical overview passage. And one of the things that's fascinated me all my writing life, but more and more over the last decade, is the simultaneous strangeness of the past, the almost alien quality of some aspects of what life was once like, what people once believed, that we are dismissive of today, how strange the past can be, but simultaneously and wonderfully, how familiar people and history can be to the needs and concerns and desires that we have today. And so almost dead center in Children of Earth and Sky, there's an interlude right after something fairly dramatic has just happened. And I pull back to the following. There were demons that sought to claim your soul for darkness. There were ghosts and spirits, frequently malevolent. The dead did not always lie quietly. Followers of all faiths knew these truths. You walked a twilit country path at peril, and when night fell with or without moons, it was madness to be abroad. You could die in a ditch of a fall, having lost sight of the road. You lived your life in intimate proximity to its end. Prayers were more intense because of this. Help was needed under sun, moons, stars, and some reason to hope for what might come after. Laughter was also necessary and found in spite of or because of these close and terrible dangers. Simple pleasures, music and dance, wine, ale, dice and cards, harvest's end, the taste of berries on the bush, tricking the bees with a hive full of honey, warmth and play in a bed at night or in the straw of a barn, companionship, sometimes love. There were reasons for fear in every season, however. In every place where men and women tried to shape and guard their lives. Autumn brought the dread of a killing winter. If it rained too much, if the harvest failed or was limited, some would die in the coming months as surely as a weak, wintry sun would rise to see it happen. If storms came and smashed the moored fishing boats to wreckage or sank them amid lightning and wild seas, hunger followed in coastal villages. If enough firewood could not be found and cut and stalked and defended, people died of cold in the north. If wolves came, gaunt and howling over hard-packed snow, and killed the livestock, assuaging their own desperation, people would also die. Disease found men and women, and always children, made weak by lack of food. Starving mothers had no milk for newborns. Brigands came down from hills or out of dense black forests. City walls might be proof against all but the worst of these, but what defense had a farmhouse, a lonely retreat, the cabin of a charcoal burner? The silver moon and the blue would swing up the sky and set while fires took homes and lives. Stars wheeled slowly above snow. Even in summer, there were terrors. If pirates or corsairs took the longed-for grain convoys, people starved in the cities. Walls, it was often said, could do nothing against famine. That same summer sun could kill in the south, drying streams and pools, scorching pastures brown, and the mountainsides where sheep and goats were herded in the heat. Plague came in summer, so many times. On merchant ships or with travelers arriving overland, the wealthy fled their cities. Whole villages were savaged by it, bodies left unburied in the sun. White flags by a boundary stone marked a place you did not go. Summer could also be a hungry season before the harvests were in, the last year's granaries trickling towards emptiness. You could be robbed of all you had in any season. Your village could be burned to ash, lost to time, forgotten. Your children could be taken into slavery, sold to the galleys. All ships of all faiths needed men to row them, chained to their benches. You rowed until you died, usually, and were discarded into the sea. And spring, glorious springtime, when the land quickened and the earth was tilled and planted, when wildflowers returned with all their colors and pale green leaves showed on trees, when desire rose like sap running, and whatever hope one had somehow carried deep inside through the cold months and the long nights struggled to emerge again. Spring, alas, was the season of war. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Jared, will you join me? Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That wasn't very funny. You weren't kidding, guy.
A bundle of laughs, right?
But, I was struck as you read that. Some of the parts of this book, which is a wonderful, wonderful novel, almost read like a romantic comedy for a page or two here. I mean, it is a funny book in parts. But I was struck as you read that by just the intense beauty of those sentences and of that language. And, you're a poet first and foremost, I always think of you as, even though you've only published one book of poems. But this is a long lead up, forgive me. Yesterday, I was talking to you, and you saw that I had read this version of your book, which is like the early one they do to send out. And you were like, oh, no, you should have read this one. I rewrote so much of it. And I wonder if you can, is it true that you're a tinkerer right up till the end? You're working on that rhythm?
To the end. I rely on, the Penguins have learned to tolerate me or pretend to tolerate me. Because technically, as you know, a book is supposed to be done at some point.
Depends who you ask.
I resist that notion, but in fact, you're supposed to be finished, and I am always fine-tuning right up to the very last moment. And what happens every time, though, is they get a little smaller. Because I'm trimming. The cuts are every page 15, 20 of them sometimes on a page, and it's one word or two words that just feel that it could be tightened and pulled together more. And on a certain level, in the world we live in, it's really wasted energy. On a certain level, it is creating more work for my publishers. It's obviously more work for me. It's a little bit of a panic for people having to adjust the pages. And 99% of people would not necessarily spot the difference on a specific set of changes. My profound belief, and I really do believe this or I wouldn't do it, is that on a subliminal level, if something is sharper, tighter, better expressed and written, even if you're not able to compare, it's like looking at two TVs. If you put a Sony next to a Toshiba, you might see a difference in the storeroom, but when you bring them home, you wouldn't see it. You wouldn't necessarily know the difference between that and this unless you put them side by side. But I'm convinced that I'm writing a better book when I do that extra step or two.
And even if it's just 1% of the people who would notice, it's probably worth doing it. For the, you know, that's your best reader, that 1%.
Well, that's
right?
where you get into a larger question. I could throw this back at you, which is, and you may ask people this, for whom are you writing? And there will be colleagues of mine who have a very clear articulation in their minds of who their audience is and what their audience is willing to let them do and is expecting from them. And forgive me, but I love you, but I'm writing for me.
He's quite glad for you to all buy the book. Don't get it wrong.
Yeah.
Something is a little different with this book. You know, it kind of has, well, we'll get into this, I hope, a bit of a red herring in the beginning. And you think, okay, I'm in Guy Kay territory, I know what's going on here. But none of these people you're writing about are kings or emperors or what we might think of as sort of the grand shapers of history. It's a book that's very deliberately, I think, about, you know, quote unquote, smaller lives. What's the appeal for you in doing that?
It's been there for at least a decade, even more, that I have been thinking about the very simple observation that the death of an emperor or the change in succession at court has extremely little impact on the life of a farmer 500 miles from the court compared to the hired hand breaking his leg the week before harvest season. The hired hand breaks his leg and you can't simply go out and find somebody. You may not get the harvest in and your children may die. And I've been thinking for a long time about what I can call the macro and the micro scales of history, that the macro, the doings of dukes and emperors and bishops, the powerful, is a compelling story. And I've told them, and it's in this book too. But those are not the only stories worth telling about the past. So this book, when you talk about a bit of a red herring in the first chapter, it starts at court. It starts with an ambassador at an imperial court. And as Jared said, you think you're in familiar space, not just for my books, but for a lot of historical writing. You think you're in the space where this will be where you are. And at the end of that chapter, you start moving to a sequence of, I'll never use the word ordinary about them because I don't want them to be ordinary, but they're not powerful. The protagonists of this novel are not the shakers and movers of this world. So chapter 1 sets you up in a bit of a misleading way, and then we move towards a set of characters who live one way or another, if you will, on the borderlands of life as a major conflict, as a war between faiths and empires is unfolding. We're actually moving around the edges of that conflict with my protagonists. And I've touched on this in previous books. I wanted to foregrounded. That's the
Yeah,
difference.
it reminded me a lot of ideas from Under Heaven, but just to see you saturate the entire book with it, it was kind of just a compelling exercise, I'd imagine, as a writer. And for the reader, it's quite thrilling because you actually have the sense that you never know what's going to happen because it is happening 500 kilometers away or whatever, as you say. I'm glad you said borderlands. I mean, that's an idea that's in this book very much. It's kind of like a near Europe, I think, is the phrase you've used. So it's this clash with all these different cultures and religions at each other's throats, which reminded me a lot of now, I think inevitably, unfortunately in some ways. To what extent do those things seep in? I know that your books are so thoroughly researched, but can you not avoid the wolf at the door? Or does it get into the novel?
Your comment about the reminding you of now. I don't believe in drawing tidy one-to-one comparisons. Like, this happened there and that's exactly the same as now. It's usually not exactly the same. In fact, I've written books, River of Stars and its relationship to Under Heaven, is partly about how we are always at risk of misunderstanding our own past, of misinterpreting what happened before. The phrase that Americans often use about we're always fighting the last war. When you're fighting the last war, you're usually fighting wrongly because you're drawing conclusions from what happened before, and you're applying them to a different situation. I'm always looking for themes in history that strike me as compelling for contemporary readers. If you can't do that, if you don't do that, frankly, why are you reading my book or anyone's book? If there isn't something there that hits you in a particular way and strikes you as vivid and memorable and ideally important. So I'm always looking for those assonances, those associations, but I never wanted to be tidy and glib and say, this happened and it's happening again. I don't want to be that tight.
But do you ever find yourself saying, you know, this guy could use just a little more Donald Trump. I'm going to take this character and just borrow, a villain, obviously, and borrow a little bit from...
Well, my great fear is that whatever I write next is going to have Donald Trump in it now.
I will take the royalty check for that idea. No problem.
I don't think I've ever thought in terms of making a historical figure resonate more as a contemporary one, nor have I found myself, I'd have to think back, ever saying, this is too much like a contemporary figure, I need to back away. I think that the assonances are sometimes there, and I think it's more about contemporary themes than contemporary people. For example, in Lions of Al-Rassan, I mean, what is more vividly contemporaneous than a clash between faiths playing out in such a way that individual people on either side of that division of faith lose their ability to shape their own friendships, loves, ideas of the world. When you become a piece in a holy war from either side, how do you individualize yourself? And Lions was written in the 1990s, and a lot of the more recent reviewers of that book talk in a way as if, how was Kay so prescient about what would happen later? But of course, the point there is, it's not prescience at all. It's the opposite. It's looking back far enough, or even sometimes not so far, but clearly enough to see and try to share patterns of behavior. So it's not so much an individual that I will be looking at. I'll be looking at those patterns that have occurred and are perhaps recurring now.
So this book presents an interesting challenge too with these kind of, you don't want to say ordinary people, but you know what I mean. And I want you to, I'm going to pin you down because I'm just curious. So you model these books in part on ideas that your Croatian publisher throws at you, or you find a historical situation on which you can kind of build with your customary quarter turn as you say. It's fantastic. But those are big ideas, and I'm interested in how you build an individual character. So my favorite character in this book, I don't know if many of you have had a chance to read it yet, is a young woman named Danica. And I would love to know how you created her. On
I
what
would
is
love
she
to know
based?
too.
By what magic?
That's a flippant answer, but it's a half serious one. And I worry when I say this because it can skate us a little bit close to the edge of the mystical, subconscious, subliminal, ethereal
Let's go.
process of art. And I've heard people do that, and I do an eye roll. I don't do it as well as my son, but I do an eye roll. That there's nonetheless a component in the writing process for me where characters start to grow, add texture and dimension in those early stages, and I didn't intend all of the things that are coming in. There's a growth process. One of the things I do, this may be a better answer for what you're looking for, is the rewriting process, which is, say, not just finishing the book and going back. I'm rewriting every, God help me, 3 or 4 pages. Because I'll do a few pages and go back and rewrite them, and then I'll write a few more and go back and rewrite 8 pages. And it's a ridiculously circular process. And the metaphor I've used is oil painting, which is kind of cute for this book because there is a painter as a central character. And when I mention oil painting, what I mean is, if you've looked at any of the great Rembrandts, or in fact any powerful worker in oils, it can sometimes have an almost 3-dimensional quality off the canvas. It's not flat on the canvas usually. A Rembrandt almost comes off because it's layering up. He's layering up the paint to add texture, depth, whatever he needs in that particular part of the canvas. And my writing method seems to be, for better or worse, that when I first write a scene, I'm finding out what the hell happens. I am finding out what's happening in that scene. The 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 9th, 12th passages through that scene are where I'm giving it texture and character depth and ideally some nuance and subtlety and sharpness. Those come in the oil painting layering up. So when you say, how do I do the characters, there's 2 things I'll zero in on. One is I care about doing it. Not every writer of fiction is going to trust his or her readers. I'm making an important point here about you. You can't always trust your readers, depending on what kind of writer you are, what kind of readership you have, to be patient with you as you take the time to make the people in the book as real and compelling and engaging and as emotionally important to you. That takes paragraphs and pages and patience and alliteration. That was an accident. The idea of making characters vivid starts with the idea that you can give yourself the space to do it. And the second element in my own work method is the reworking of the scenes to let that happen.
You told me yesterday, though, when I was saying how much I love Danica, you told me a little secret. I don't know if you feel...
What's the point of a secret if you tell it on camera?
Tell your 400 closest friends the secret of this book.
Last time I drank a...
Yeah, we had a Negroni to prepare, and it got a little carried away.
It's not a secret. It's a craft thing. And the joke I made with Jared is that one of the ways you're aware that you're getting older is that you start recognizing certain things about your own craft because you've done this before. So the first chapter I wrote of Children of Earth and Sky, the original chapter 1 was of Danica Gradek, a young woman in a boat at night with her dog and a bow going out to kill people. And for better or worse, and Jared has said she's his favorite character, I knew as I was writing her in that very first chapter that she was kick-ass compelling. I knew that. I knew
True.
that.
He's not just bragging.
I knew that she was going to engage. And that, and this is the story that we talked about, this is the fun part of it, that was a problem. That wasn't an unadulterated good thing or benefit. Here's why it was a problem. I knew, we were just talking about it, that I wanted to do a book with many protagonists in different walks of life, with different ambitions, who might come together and then break apart and then come together again. And I had 4 other characters who needed to engage you very intensely. And I believe to a certain degree that as readers, because I'm a reader too, every writer I know is a reader, we're like goslings. We get imprinted by the first thing we see when we come into a book. You know, if a character like Danica Graddock walks past you when you first enter a book, she owns you. You're hers. You're hers. That is the center of the novel, my instinct told me, and I had other people who needed to share the center of the book with her. So I shifted it to this courtly, slightly red herring introduction that did all sorts of things I wanted to do with the story. And chapters 2 and 3 and 4 are parts of the book where you start meeting several characters, of which she's one. Mm-hmm. I had to do a little bit of a deferring of that entry for her, or else she would have hijacked the novel. And by the way, she's a pirate, so hijacking works.
Yeah. When you read it, when you get to that scene of her on the boat, think about if this had opened the book. Because when you said it to me yesterday, it blew my mind. It would have changed the book completely. I think you're absolutely right. Part of what you have to do in that opening, of course, is explain a lot of stuff. Because this is a world, a realm that we know from your books. Oh, it's a fire alarm. Oh, goodness, sorry. That's someone who's screaming. It's not that exciting. We know this world from your books, but it's set many hundreds of years after the Sarantine Mosaic. And you did the same thing, as you kind of alluded to earlier, with River of Stars being set a couple of 100 years, 400 years maybe, after Under Heaven. And it got me thinking, it must be tough to kind of compete with yourself. Like, are you ever like, well, why did I do that? You know, you have to obey your own history now.
Yeah, it's an issue and a problem. In the most technical way, you have to go back and reread.
Yeah.
Because there are certain ground rules that are laid down when you have, when you imprint with something already. You cannot, in conscience, violate what's already set.
Precisely.
I'll give you a funny, fast story about something like that. Some of you will have read the Piano Bar Tapestry, and
some of you.
I remember Laura and I going out for drinks with a good friend of mine, a playwright, and his new girlfriend, who was a classical guitarist. And we were, the 4 of us sat down, and I had just published The Wandering Fire, the second book of Piano Bar, and I had just finished writing The Darkest Road. And the 4 of us sat down, and my friend Gordy and my wife started chattering away in a lively fashion of young couples out for drinks. And this woman named Danielle, prepossessing, intense guitarist musician, is staring at me. We ended up sitting across from each other, and she's staring at me. And I said, what?
Can I help you?
And she said, I'm going to be careful how I put this, but she said, in a voice that could have sliced me apart, she said, I will forgive you for killing X. But if Y dies in the third book, I will kill you.
Did it happen?
I remember, though, this is the early memory when you talk about things about it. I remember thinking, damn it, it's a good thing I finished that third book. Because I might have rewritten it in order to stay alive. The things that are in print are the locked in.
They're canon.
Yeah, you can't, they're canonical. They are the setting. What interests me, though, that's not a negative. That's almost like you're writing a sonnet. You're locked into a verse form. Mm-hmm. I'm locked into certain things that happened in the past of my book, and I can use them, or I can be constrained by them. It cuts both ways. What interests me most, actually what I love doing, is what Jared hinted at, which is when I can use a book that takes place much later than an earlier one to say some things about the way we remember or misremember the past. And I mean that on both the macro level of the grand sweep of history, whether Richard III was a hunchbacked murderer or a maligned victim of Tudor propaganda. We can battle about what the truth of that was. But we also misremember our own lives. We construct our own history from a mixture of memory and false memory of what actually happened to us. We even will hear a conversation differently. That if you and I are talking, that woman Danielle, when I jokingly said she talked to me in a voice that could have cut glass and murdered, and if she were here, she might say, I just asked him and made a simple comment. She might say I was being low-key and restrained, and I was feeling threatened with homicide. That's really interesting because we can both be telling the truth. We hear and interpret each other not all that well sometimes, or often. That's why romance and politics are so damn difficult. We're not good at understanding each other. One of the themes of Children of Earth and Sky is exactly that. Mm-hmm. It's the fallibility of how we understand our world and each other. It's one of the underlying points of the novel.
Well, and you do this wonderful thing. It's very striking. In moments of crisis, in particular in the book, like a really tense scene, you will break mid-sentence, mid-action, and switch to someone else's perspective. But every time you do it, you rewind the tape by 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 seconds. And it gives you that opportunity to have that idea just dramatized for you. And you're reminded that it's impossible to, even in the moment, to see. I mean, I don't know how this has been going for you. For me, it's been fine. But maybe
I'm having a great
you have a different feeling about it. You know what I mean?
Fun?
It's a wonderful trick.
It wasn't anything I had done before nearly to the degree that I do it in this novel. What Jared's talking about is that I will have a scene in the book where a character will be in the perspective of a particular character, that she will say, please sit down now. And I will back up, and I'll back up, as Jared said, that rewinding of the tape a little bit when I switch to the person she's talking to. And that person will be telling the exact same moment, and what you will read when it's from his point of view is, sit down right now. And there's a reason I'm doing this, because it ties in with what we're talking about, is that we remember, we hear, we react, we emotionally respond in very different ways to the same moment. And that happens on the personal scale of a father and daughter, in this case, confronting each other in a tense situation.
It's an incredible
And it
scene.
happens on the larger scale of an ambassador and an imperial court, where they misinterpret each other. That interests me a lot in this novel.
So I mentioned this to you yesterday. One of the things, I have the good fortune to talk to a lot of writers. And one of the things that interests me when you read a writer over the course of his or her career is that you see them change. I mean, they get better, hopefully most of the time, but also what they're interested in changes. I was really struck by what Nicole said earlier about how this book is so much about kindness. And that's a question of further subjectivity, because as soon as she said it, I was like, aha, yeah, obviously, I wish I'd thought to write a question about that. But I didn't, sorry. But this book is really interested in that. And I'm interested in how people evolve as artists, because I think it's related to how you change as a person. You grow deeper, more mature, ideally more moral, more compassionate. So I was wondering, a kind of flip coin question. What did you used to be interested in when you were a young man, a young writer, that you could care less about now? And what drives you now that never would have been on your radar then?
There's a line in Yeats, the poet William Butler Yeats, who talked about, I'm not going to quote it right because I don't want to mangle Yeats, because that's a capital offense.
Still pretty impressive, don't worry.
Yeah, you don't want to mangle Yeats. But the thought is, one time, I wouldn't have read or listened to a poet unless I could believe he had a sword upstairs, that he was ready to swash my buckle and flamboyantly carve the whole tavern to pieces. And he says, now if I had my way, he'd be colder and deader and dumber than a fish. I'm not there. I'm not that far. But your observation about the things that change is both acutely observed and, I'm going to say, obviously necessary. If we are not changing through our lives, what are we doing with our lives? What is the importance of the experiences we've had? Marriage, child rearing, deaths of family or dear friends, the inevitability of alteration as we get older. If these things don't change us, something's wrong. Now, things endure. Things last and endure. I'm still fascinated. I was fascinated 30 years ago by historical process, and I still am. Mm-hmm. I was fascinated by the interplay between legend and reality, and I still am. But Nicole mentioned, and she said when she first finished the book, her first note to me was that I wasn't expecting so much kindness to be present in what's in fact a fairly violent novel with a fairly grim setting. At the short passage I read to you is about the grimness of the setting. And what interests me, what engages me, is that even in such a time, perhaps even more in such a time, we need each other. We rely on each other. We can't survive without each other. The grace notes that life can give us come from friendships and interaction, and if you're extremely lucky, love. And I suppose to answer your question, I've become more caught up in and engaged by, as I get older, as a writer, and I suppose as a person, those questions and issues.
There's a kind of related question here. I'm going to move to these cards. I hope you've all handed in your cards. These are our questions from the audience. And I'm struck by this one, which seems to touch on a similar idea. I like this question. It says, your earlier books were much more polarized. This is the problem, is handwriting with these cards. This is much better than mine, though. Polarized with regard to good and evil, whereas your more recent efforts are more morally ambivalent. Everyone's just doing their best to get through and try to survive. And the question is there still good and evil in your literary universe?
Yes, I think so. In my actual universe, too. I have a dear friend who once said that observing a position of detached neutrality between good and evil is not a balanced position. What I'm more interested in is exactly what the questioner is adverting to, is the nuances and complexities where it's not as tidy. That good and evil framework primarily resides in the first trilogy I wrote when I was 29, 30 years old, which was squarely in the high fantasy tradition that Tolkien had made most prominent. And part of the bedrock of books in that tradition was that underlying conflict, which for him was a religious conflict of good and evil. For me, it wasn't, but it was a framework to work with myth. That's what I was doing back then at Vianova. I was working with myth and legend. Over the years, starting with Tigana and continuing with Song for Arbonne and on, the migration hasn't been away from using the fantastic. Fantastic is a wonderful tool for a writer, by the way. We could talk all night about it as a literary tool. My migration has been, to a degree, away from mythology and towards history and psychology. That's been what's engaged me more. That's been the movement.
Well, and it almost seems inevitable that as you age and become more interested in psychology, you realize that notion being polarized is almost impossible. These things blur no matter what we try to do. We have two people who've asked the same question, which is kind of miraculous. And they both note that a lot of your novels are set in a kind of a fictionalized version of Asia or Europe or the Middle East. Have you ever considered setting a novel in a similar version of North or South America?
I consider almost everything. The book that my editor really wants from me is my baseball novel.
They sell so well, baseball.
That's not true. That's not true. I'm teasing her. But remember, it took me 10 years to get to the Uskoks. And it was a great idea, and we were right there. I'm amazingly slow to get the right idea or to get to the right idea. I just answered this in an email interview today. It comes up a fair bit, twice tonight. Almost anything any of you were to say to me, the Incas, Kiev in Russia, there are so many, Scarborough, adultery in Scarborough. You know,
That's the one I can't wait for.
it's been done. So many things are inherently compelling, and people have written about them. Sometimes compellingly, sometimes not, but we're not going to go there. The challenge for me is that it can't just be an interesting time and place. It has to be something that resonates in such a way that I think, like an archaeologist, I can go digging there and bring back something that I want to share. It can't just be a period that interests me. I'm going to live there for 3 or 4 years. I'm going to be engaging with it for a long time, and something has to come out of it that feels like I have something to share with readers in the world that is new and different. I'll give you a very fast example. I've all my life been fascinated by classical Greece. I wrote 2 books on the south coast of Crete. My first backpacking trip in Europe, the country that imprinted me, was Greece at 18. I've never written about Greece as such, and there's a really, this is a secret, but it's not, there's a really personal reason. Mary Renault nailed it. Mary Renault in The Last of the Wine and The King Must Die, her Alexander books, she was so convincing and compelling for me in how she wrote about classical Greece that that space felt occupied. There was, and there still isn't, something that I want to do with classical Greece that would be dramatically and radically and compellingly different from what her wonderful books were. Yeah. It wasn't a conscious decision that I won't write about Greece. It was just a feeling that there isn't a space for me to do something.
So like Cleveland circa 1980 next? That would
There
be
you
a
go.
good one. 1980.
You really
Suburban
want me to
vibes.
write about your childhood, right?
Exactly. This is a
Be
curious
careful
one.
what you wish for.
Someone would like to know, when they first purchased Under Heaven, they were informed that it was the first in a trilogy.
Which
Is
one?
Under Heaven.
No.
Is this not true?
This is one of the amazing things about the internet world. Somebody once said that you can't get anything off the internet. It's like trying to get pee out of a swimming pool. And, and you can't drain the internet and start again. The frequency with which false information gets out there, and you're churning like a mad banshee to try to track it down and get it off there, is astonishing. I never, ever called any of the Under Heaven or River of Stars part of a trilogy. The story that freaked me out was that when, and this was not done by Canada, so Nicole is innocent, the Americans, God bless them, when Last Light of the Sun came out, at one early point with that book, because I didn't know what I was going to call it, I hadn't even started writing it, my contract for that book was they wanted to put a name down. And I said, I'm going to write a book about Vikings and Anglo-Saxons and Celts. It's going to take place in the Northlands, with a plural. So that was what was on the contract. They paid me X dollars for the Northlands, a novel to be about 170,000 words or whatever. God help me, when Last Light of the Sun comes out, on Amazon in the US and Barnes & Noble in the US and Powell's.com in the US, it says, Last Light of the Sun, Volume 1 of the Northlands series.
It's not a bad idea, actually.
I called my agent and said, look at that contract. I didn't commit to a series, it's a book. To this day, that book came out, I think, in 2001, 15 years later. You can see on some independent booksellers online, Last Light of the Sun, Volume 1 of the Northland series.
Eagerly awaiting volume 6.
There are probably people out there who think I'm worse than George Martin. 15 years have gone by.
But you must occasionally be tempted by that. I mean, you know, one of the things that I love about your books is you do what you want, and you've earned that at this point in your career. This is, you know, as you said on Twitter this week, a standalone book. Are you ever tempted to just, you know, cash in big time and write a 5-volume masterwork or something?
I'm too stupid. I'm not commercial enough in that way. The problem for me is getting bored. I need to be stimulated, galvanized, a little frightened because I don't outline the books. I don't know exactly what's coming. I don't know the endings while I'm writing them. I have only the broadest sense. I'm like a surfer, not a web surfer. I'm like a surfboard guy in Malibu, and I am on a wave that's a little bigger than I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
Every book, to this day, for my entire writing career, that's been the feeling.
So think of how big the wave would be if you did a 5.
But if I'm staying with the same people,
Yeah.
and the same story, and I'm thinking I'm going to be doing this, remember I'm 3 years of book practice, I'm going to be doing this for 10, 15 years, my own makeup as a person would get bored doing it. And I won't say the inevitable truth, because we can be fooled, but the instinctive truth I feel is that if the writer's bored, the reader's going to get bored. There's a story, I want to tell you something about this, about the people who only want to, only is the wrong word, whose principal aspiration is just to entertain. The people who will say, Dan Brown sold umpteen gazillion books, I can write as badly as him, I can sell umpteen gazillion books. And they're wrong. They've tried, and they're wrong. Because a Jackie Collins or a Dan Brown is writing as well as they can. They know what they want to do. They know who their readers are and what their readers want from them. They're not slumming. They're not patronizing. They are writing what they can do as well as they can do it. And Jackie Collins, in an interview that stayed with me, talked about how she wept writing the last chapters of her, forgive me, pretty cheesy fiction. And she wept writing the endings of those books. And I read that, and I said, I absolutely believe her. This is not a media comment. She's not saying this to generate tears in her readers and emotion. She is saying something that I believe was true of her. Her framework on the world and on writing was to be deeply engaged by the story she was telling. And so the 5-volume thing for me, I wouldn't do it very well. And I don't want to be writing a book if I don't feel I can do it well.
So we have one last question, which seemed like a fitting note to end on because we're here in a library, so you can go forth and use this information immediately. Someone out there wonders what some history books that have been really fascinating for you in your research that you would recommend are. They came across a book on the Ushkoks through an interview that you gave. So further reading notes, what would you recommend?
I have further reading at the back of every one of the last 6 or 8 books. I have a limited short bibliography. I mentioned a book, but this is daunting, but it's glorious. I mentioned a book to Jared over our Negroni yesterday, that there's a French historian, Fernand Braudel, who wrote, he's profoundly important in the history of history writing. He founded a movement and a group, and he wrote a book called The Mediterranean, where he was writing about the 16th century Europe. It's 2 volumes, it's 1,000 pages, it is stupefyingly rich and interesting. And one of the core points for Children of Earth and Sky was a comment early in those 2 volumes. I did keep going, I didn't stop after the early comment. I read it twice. He was talking about how we must not imagine that in times of great war and conflict between faiths and nations, that ordinary men and women were as caught up in the war and conflict as the leaders were. And he said they were too much engaged by opportunities for trade, by necessities for survival, to be caught up in that abstract, who's going to be the emperor or the king. Braudel is a magnificent historian. I could rattle off books about historical periods.
No, they should buy the book and get the list.
Buy the book and
That's
look
even-
at the back of the book.
I just want to end by saying I've read a lot of Guy's books. We've done this a number of times together. And this book is truly astounding. One of the pleasures of getting to do these things is getting to recommend to a big room full of people. I assume you all will read this book because you're here if you haven't already, but if you're wavering, you must pick it up. It is beautiful, it's heartbreaking. It's full of, I think, some of the best characters of Guy's career, and I think you'll truly love it. So that's my closing endorsement. But I think we need to just say thank you to you for this wonderful evening and for the book. Thanks, Guy.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.